In part 3 of The Story So Far, The Last of Us, we talked about Joel and Ellie's meeting with Tommy and their group, followed by their subsequent journey to the University of Eastern Colorado, as well as the events portrayed in the Left Behind DLC. This is the fourth and final part of the series. We're going to pick things up at the beginning of winter and recount the remainder of the story. The snows have set in, and winter is well and truly underway by the time The Last of Us' story picks up again. And as it does something a little surprising. It puts players in the shoes of Ellie. After having spent so many hours playing as Joel, we find Ellie alone in the snow-covered woods, armed with a bow and arrow and hunting for meat when she comes across a buck in the distance. She manages to shoot it with a couple of arrows, and once she finds the trail of blood from its wounds, she manages to track it to an abandoned shack, where the buck has succumbed to its injuries and died by the time Ellie makes it there. That's not all she finds, however. As she stands over the dead buck by the shack, she notices two people approaching. With every reason to be cautious, she draws her bow and puts them in her sights, demanding to know what they want. They tell her they're David and James, a part of a larger group, and they offer to trade for her buck. Ellie is hesitant, understandably enough, but when David tells her that he'd be willing to trade anything for the buck, she asks him if he has any antibiotics, obviously needing them for the still injured Joel. David tells Ellie that he does indeed have antibiotics and tells James to go back to their camp to retrieve them, accepting to stay behind with Ellie and wait for him to come back. Ellie also asks David to give up his rifle, to which he agrees quite easily. He proceeds to ask her name, but despite his seemingly good nature, Ellie is still unwilling to trust him, and she refuses to divulge any real information about herself. As they wait for David's companion to return, however, they hear the infected in the distance, and they both realize that they're headed in their direction in quite large numbers. David pulls out his pistol, and together he and Ellie are able to hold the infected at bay and ultimately fight them off. Following that, they continue their wait for James, but while they do, Ellie makes a startling discovery. David reveals to her that the people that had attacked her and Joel at the University of Eastern Colorado had been his own men, and they'd been part of the same group of survivors. And David, it seems, is clearly not happy about how many of his people Joel and Ellie managed to kill in that attack. Realizing that she may be in more trouble than she can handle right now, Ellie jumps to her feet with her rifle pointed at David. But right at that moment, James returns with his own weapon pointed at Ellie. David, on the other hand, continues to sit calmly by the fire and tells his man to lower his weapon. James is reluctant to do that, but he does so upon David's orders, who then goes on to order him to give Ellie the antibiotics he brought as well. With the medicine in hand, Ellie leaves the shack and runs. Before long, she manages to find where she had hitched her horse and rides away. Soon, she arrives at an abandoned house, and when she goes in, it's revealed that Joel is inside. He's resting on the ground, still looking extremely ill and very weak. Ellie injects the medicine into Joel, covers him with a blanket, and goes to sleep on the floor by his side. When she wakes up though, she realizes that things have once again taken a turn for the worse. She discovers that David and his group have managed to track her down, and seeing as Joel is barely conscious and in no condition to fight, she realizes that she has only one option. She leaves the house, hoping to distract David's group and then circle back for Joel once she's managed to shake them. She quickly gets on her horse and rides away, successfully getting the attention of the attackers and managing to draw them to her. Her horse gets shot down rather quickly, however, forcing her to continue forward on foot. As she makes her way past David's men, at a certain point it starts looking like she may just be able to escape. Unfortunately enough, however, the heroes of this world just don't have that kind of luck. David manages to catch up to Ellie, and he knocks her unconscious. When Ellie wakes up, she's locked in a cell, and right outside her cell she sees James, David's companion from earlier, butchering what looks like a human body on a table. Yes, you guessed it right. David's group is the post-apocalyptic group of cannibals that we just knew had to be included in this kind of story. Ellie is understandably fazed as she sees the sight. David, who is also there, tells Ellie that he doesn't intend to kill her. He tries getting on her good side, telling her that she just might have a place in his group if she's willing to join. And as you may have guessed, Ellie has no intention of doing that. Being the feisty personality that she is, she makes an attempt to grab the keys off David, breaking one of his fingers in the process. Having lost his patience by this point, David makes it quite clear to Ellie that she's just signed her own death warrant. He leaves the room, telling her that he's gonna cut her up to little pieces. Back at the abandoned house, Joel finally wakes up. probably thanks to the medicine Ellie gave him earlier. He notices Ellie's missing and goes outside, only to see that there are other people in the area as well, and all of them armed. As you've put together, these people are from David's group as well. Joel kills all the people in the area, save for 2, and these 2 he captures. In an intense sequence that follows, Joel tortures and questions both of them, until they give up the location of the resort where David's group is keeping Ellie. Having been told what he wanted to know, Joel promptly kills both his captives. The focus jumps back to Ellie again as she's roughly woken up by James. He drags her to the butcher's table where both he and David try to hold her down. Ellie tries to struggle, biting David in the process, but to no effect. Just as David is about to bring down the cleaver on her though, she bursts out that she's infected, proceeding to show them the wound on her arm. The 2 men stand shocked and Ellie sees her opportunity and takes it. She grabs the butcher knife and buries it in James's neck. Even as David shoots at her, she manages to make a narrow escape. She runs for it, looking for a way out of the resort, and eventually finds herself in an old restaurant. David gives chase and quickly manages to track her down, trapping her inside the restaurant. The building catches fire in their ensuing struggle, and with the 2 of them still inside. Ellie tries to get in close and stab him with her switchblade and manages to get a few hits in successfully. However, soon, the 2 get into a struggle which results in both of them being knocked unconscious, trapped in the middle of a raging fire. Meanwhile, Joel has managed to find his way to the resort by now. The next portion of the game sees players playing as Joel and fighting or sneaking past David's men. Finally, he finds what he's looking for. He spots a building drowning in flames a short distance away. Inside the building, Ellie comes to. She spots David's machete lying under a table, and injured and dizzy as she is, she starts crawling toward it. David, however, wakes up as well and stops her. He kicks her a few times and then pins her down. Ellie tries struggling, and soon she manages to grab hold of the machete. She violently hacks away at David, slashing him with her weapon again and again, even past the point of killing him. Joel enters the building at this point and runs to Ellie. He pulls her away, but Ellie, who is understandably traumatized, pushes him away, thinking he's another one of David's men. Joel manages to soothe her, holding her in his arms, and the 2 soon leave. The Last of Us' story skips forward one more time at this juncture, moving past winter and into spring. Joel and Ellie's trek to Salt Lake City has gone rather well. In fact, when we rejoin them, St. Mary's Hospital, the Fireflies' home base, is clearly visible in the distance. They make their way through the overgrown, abandoned city in the direction of the hospital, and as they do, they find something beautiful and unexpected. Even if you haven't played The Last of Us, chances are you've heard of the giraffe scene. One of the most persistent and striking uses of imagery associated with The Last of Us is that of nature retaking what belongs to it, of trees and forests growing in old and destroyed cities, of wildlife moving back into places that had once been inhabited by scores of humans. As Joel and Ellie are making their way through these overgrown ruins, they come across a herd of giraffes. They manage to get close to one of them and take turns petting it. This is another one of those scenes that The Last of Us uses to perfection to contrast the coexisting desolation and the beauty of the apocalypse. As they leave to continue making their way toward the hospital, however, Joel stops Ellie. He tells her that they don't have to go to the Fireflies, that if they want, they can just go back to Tommy's in Jackson County and try to live out a peaceful life. But Ellie won't have it. The 2 of them have come too far, done too much, and been through even more to give up now. She tells him that if they just turn back now, it'll all have been for nothing. As they continue onward, Ellie brings up Sarah once again, and surprisingly this time Joel reacts rather differently. Ellie hands him a photograph of his daughter, telling him she grabbed it when they were at Tommy's all those months ago. Joel accepts the photo and thanks her for it, accepting that in spite of all his efforts, he's not going to escape his past, and maybe it's for the best if he just stops trying. They eventually make it to an underground tunnel, but they realize making it through would be easier said than done. For starters, the tunnel is completely flooded, and as we've learned by this point, Ellie doesn't know how to swim. As if that weren't enough, a few areas inside that aren't completely submerged are teeming with the infected. The next portion of the game sees Joel and Ellie tiptoe their way around a dangerously high number of runners and clickers. The 2 of them eventually get to a rickety platform that looks like a way out of the tunnel, with some overturned buses acting like a sort of bridge toward the platform. As they get on top of the buses, they find out that the water on the other side is much more dangerous and ferocious, and predictably enough, things start to go wrong. Joel falls off, and the two of them soon find themselves inside the bus, trapped in the middle of rushing water. Joel grabs hold of Ellie, who, thanks to her inability to swim in the rushing water, has lost consciousness. He drags her out of the water, somehow making it to the tunnel's exit. He frantically tries to resuscitate her, and in his panic, he doesn't even notice as a patrol of armed and armored Fireflies approach them. With their weapons aimed at Joel and the unconscious Ellie, they tell him to put his hands in the air, and when the panic-stricken Joel ignores them, one of the Fireflies hits him in the head with his rifle and knocks him out. When Joel wakes up, he finds that he's lying in a hospital bed with Marlene sitting by his side. She tells him that it was her men who rescued him and Ellie. Joel is visibly relieved, but this relief doesn't last very long. He and Ellie may have been constantly putting their lives at risk for the better part of the last year just so they can get to the Fireflies. But things in the world of The Last of Us don't always turn out the way one might expect them to. Joel asks Marlene to take him to see Ellie, but she tells him that that's not possible. Ellie, you see, is already being prepped for surgery by the Fireflies doctors. She is to undergo a procedure that'll remove the mutated infection inside of her head, which would then be used by the scientists to reverse engineer a vaccine. And while this may sound like excellent news to possibly every person left on the planet, Joel knows what that means. He points out that the fungal virus grows over the host's entire brain, which means that if this procedure is conducted, Ellie will die. And Joel can't have that. Things between him and Marlene start to get tense. He tells her that if doing this operation means Ellie loses her life, then she needs to find someone else. But, of course, there is no one else. And that's why Ellie's immunity is as special as it is. Marlene tells Joel that she doesn't like what's about to happen either, and she's known Ellie for a long time, and her death will be hard on her as well. But if her death is the price that has to be paid to save the entire human race, then that's just what has to happen. Marlene quickly realizes that the idea of the procedure isn't sitting well with Joel, and that in all likely scenarios, he's probably going to try to stop it. She orders one of the Firefly soldiers to escort Joel out of the building, and if he tries anything, to shoot him and kill him. But Joel, as we have learned, can be an untamed beast when he needs to be, and protecting Ellie is the one thing that now drives him more than anything else. As he is being escorted outside, Joel attacks the Firefly soldier and kills him. He recovers his weapon and his belongings and makes for the operating room. Scores of Fireflies swarm in, attracted by the gunshots, and a good chunk of the game that follows tasks the players with fighting their way through them. Eventually, Joel makes it to the operating room, where the surgeons are standing over an unconscious Ellie. Joel kills the doctors, grabs Ellie, and runs through the hospital as he tries to find a way out. After narrowly escaping more incoming Fireflies, he finds an elevator and takes it all the way down to the basement. When he gets there, though, he sees Marlene is standing in front of him with her gun pointed right at him. She makes one final attempt to change his mind. Marlene tells Joel that performing this surgery on Ellie is the only way to fight back against the cordyceps infection, and that if Ellie knew the price that had to be paid for it, she would do so willingly. She tells him that even if she were alive, this world was not worth living in. Sooner or later, she would get torn to pieces by one of the infected, and if she weren't, she'd probably get raped and murdered by outlaws and bandits. Marlene lowers her weapon, telling Joel that he can still do the right thing here. The concepts of right and wrong, however, have become extremely misty in Joel's mind over the last 20 years. He shoots Marlene in the stomach and puts Ellie in the car, and then turns back around to kill the leader of the Fireflies. Marlene, lying injured on the ground, begs him to let her live, to leave and never return. But Joel is not the kind of person who likes leaving loose ends, and that's just what he tells Marlene. He tells her that if he let her live, she'd just come after Ellie, and he shoots her in the head. As they're driving away from the hospital, Ellie regains consciousness. When she asks Joel what's going on, he lies to her, hiding the truth about everything that happened. He tells her that she's just one of the many people who are immune to the infection, and that their attempts to find a cure for the virus have all been for nothing. He tells her that the Fireflies have actually stopped looking for a cure. The Last of Us skips ahead in time one final time. Joel and Ellie have made it back to Jackson County and are just a short distance away from Tommy's town when their car stops working. As the two of them walk through the woods to the place they plan to call home, Ellie stops Joel. She tells him about Riley, her friend who died in Boston when the two of them were bitten. and then mentions all the other people that died to help Ellie get to the Fireflies. Understandably enough, she's experiencing a little bit of survivor's guilt, and she's wondering if with her immunity there was something more she could have done to help end the pandemic. It's then that she asks Joel, point blank, about the truth of what happened in the hospital. She asks him if everything he told her was true, everything about the Fireflies and the cure. Joel pauses, looks at her, and he tells her that it was. Ellie looks back at him, uncertain, and as the player starts wondering if she believes him, she says, "Okay," and the screen cuts to black. And there it is. That's how The Last of Us finishes, with one of the most unusual and powerful endings you'll ever see in a video game. One that perfectly encapsulates the understated genius of the entire game as a whole. And that brings an end to this series as well. If there's anything that you feel we may have missed, or if you have suggestions about which series or game we should look at next in our Story So Far series, sound off in the comments section below.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.